Why is it perfectly legal in this city to bury your dead above the ground in stone ovens? Yet for over a century it was illegal to give away a free drink? Welcome to 71 Dumbest Things About New Orleans That Aren't on Bourbon Street, where we expose the governor who won re-election while on federal corruption trial. A legal red light district that ran for 20 years with the city's blessing. And the myth you still believe about Mardi Gras beads. We're separating real history from Bourbon Street legend. So hit subscribe before we reveal the truth. 1. New Orleans started life in 1718 as a swampy French trading post nobody in Paris actually wanted. French officials basically dumped it on the map and hoped for the best. Settlers arrived expecting riches and instead found mosquitoes and floods and mud up to their knees. The Mississippi Company sold the whole idea like a dream vacation package, and colonists got the world's soggiest timeshare instead. Yet somehow this mosquito swamp became one of America's wildest cities. Locals joke their ancestors got scammed into founding a legendary city. Not bad for a real estate deal gone hilariously wrong. 2. Nobody likes finding out their whole city got given away behind their back. In 1762, France secretly handed New Orleans to Spain, and colonists kept living like proud Frenchmen for years completely clueless. People strolled the streets speaking French and cooking French and arguing French, all while technically being Spanish subjects. When the truth finally came out, residents were furious and even revolted against their new Spanish rulers. Spain eventually had to send troops just to remind everyone who was actually in charge. Basically, an entire city got swapped like a trading card and nobody thought to mention it. 3. Spain quietly handed Louisiana back to France in 1800, and almost nobody in America even noticed it happening. The treaty was so secretive that Spanish officials kept running the colony like nothing had changed at all. Meanwhile, Napoleon had bigger problems brewing back in Europe, involving debts and endless wars. He needed cash far more than he needed a swampy American territory across the ocean. This secretly traded city was quietly about to change hands yet again within just a few years. New Orleans residents must have felt like furniture nobody bothered consulting before rearranging the entire room. 4. Thomas Jefferson sent negotiators to buy New Orleans, and instead, Napoleon offered him the entire Louisiana territory. American diplomats went shopping for one port city and came home owning 800,000 square miles. The price worked out to roughly 3 cents an acre, which remains history's greatest real estate bargain. Congress nearly panicked because the Constitution never mentioned buying entire countries from France overnight. Jefferson himself worried he was overstepping his own presidential authority throughout the entire deal. Somehow it closed anyway, and America doubled in size without anyone in Louisiana signing a thing. 5. New Orleans residents were still legally French and Spanish subjects for weeks after Napoleon sold their home to America. News traveled painfully slow across the Atlantic, and then even slower up the Mississippi River. Locals kept speaking French and going about daily life completely unaware they now lived in the United States. When American officials finally arrived to take command, confusion and outrage spread through the streets. Many residents felt genuinely insulted that their whole nationality changed without so much as a warning. New Orleans basically got a citizenship update delivered weeks late, like painfully slow mail. 6. A massive fire tore through New Orleans in 1788 and destroyed most of the original French buildings within hours. The blaze broke out on Good Friday, which local priests refused to interrupt by ringing the alarm bells. Superstition apparently mattered more than firefighting, so flames spread completely unchecked across the city. Spanish authorities governing the city at the time rebuilt everything using their own architectural style instead. That is the real reason the famous French Quarter looks distinctly Spanish rather than French today. Tourists admiring those pretty balconies rarely realize they are looking at the results of a stubborn priest. 7. Andrew Jackson fought and won the Battle of New Orleans in January 1815 with soldiers who had no idea the war was already over. The Treaty of Ghent ending the War of 1812 had already been signed weeks earlier overseas. News simply had not crossed the Atlantic fast enough to reach anyone fighting down in Louisiana. Jackson's ragtag army of soldiers and pirates and militia crushed the British anyway in a stunning victory. This pointless battle made Jackson a national hero and eventually launched him straight into the presidency. Nothing says American determination quite like winning a war that had technically already ended weeks before. 8. By the 1840s, New Orleans had become the largest slave market anywhere in the entire United States. Buyers and traders flooded into the city, making human trafficking a disturbingly normal part of daily commerce. Auction blocks operated openly near hotels and banks as if selling people was routine business. The scale of suffering behind this economic engine shaped the city's wealth for generations afterward. Many of New Orleans' grand old buildings and fortunes trace directly back to profits from this trade. It remains one of the darkest chapters, hiding behind the city's charming architecture and lively streets today. 9. Louisiana created a legally recognized third racial class before the Civil War called Free People of Color. This group held rights unheard of elsewhere in the South, including property ownership and business licenses. Some free people of color became wealthy landowners running successful businesses throughout New Orleans and beyond. It made Louisiana's racial system stranger and more complicated than almost anywhere else in America. Northern visitors were often shocked to see this social structure operating so openly in a southern state. New Orleans somehow built its own unique racial rulebook that nowhere else in the country really matched. 10. Some free black New Orleanians did not just gain freedom, but actually became slaveholders themselves before the Civil War. A number of them ran successful plantations complete with enslaved workers, just like their white neighbors. This uncomfortable reality complicates the simple story most people assume about race in the Old South. Historians still debate the motivations, ranging from economic survival to genuinely troubling choices some individuals made. It shows just how tangled and contradictory New Orleans' racial history really was back then. The city's past refuses to fit neatly into any simple narrative people expect to hear today. 11. New Orleans hosted quadroon balls where wealthy white men attended formal events specifically to meet mixed-race women. These gatherings were dressed up as elegant social occasions, but functioned as arranged relationships outside legal marriage. Mothers often groomed daughters for years, hoping to secure a wealthy protector through these curated events. The arrangements provided some financial security, but came wrapped in deeply unequal power and circumstance. Visitors from the North found the entire tradition scandalous and openly wrote about it with shock. New Orleans somehow turned an uncomfortable social practice into one of its most talked-about traditions. 12. Louisiana's 1724 Code Noir laid out some of the strictest slave laws found anywhere in French colonial territory. The code controlled nearly every aspect of enslaved people's lives, down to religion and even Sunday activities. It also included harsh punishments that shocked observers, even by the brutal standards of that era. Some provisions technically addressed treatment, yet enforcement remained wildly inconsistent, depending entirely on individual slaveholders. Historians still study the code today as a chilling blueprint for colonial control and cruelty. New Orleans carried this rigid legal framework forward for generations, shaping the city's troubled foundation. 13. New Orleans surrendered to Union troops in 1862 without a single shot fired inside the city itself. Confederate forces had already retreated, leaving the city essentially defenseless against the approaching Union fleet. Admiral Farragut sailed right up the Mississippi and demanded surrender with overwhelming naval firepower behind him. Furious residents tore down Confederate flags themselves, rather than let Union soldiers claim that symbolic victory. The quick and bloodless surrender actually spared New Orleans from the destruction many other southern cities endured. Sometimes giving up fast turns out to be the smartest move a city can make. 14. The Mississippi River flood of 1927 displaced more than 600,000 people across the entire state of Louisiana. Levees failed catastrophically, sending walls of water crashing through towns with almost no warning at all. Families climbed onto rooftops, watching their entire lives float past in the rising floodwaters below. Relief efforts struggled to keep pace with the sheer scale of destruction across the Mississippi Delta. The disaster reshaped how Americans thought about flood control and government responsibility for years afterward. It remains one of the most devastating natural disasters most Americans have somehow never even heard about. 15. Officials deliberately dynamited a levee below New Orleans in 1927, hoping to save the city from catastrophic flooding. The explosion sent millions of gallons of water crashing straight into poorer rural parishes instead of downtown. Wealthy business leaders had pushed hard for this decision while promising compensation that mostly never fully arrived. Entire farming communities lost everything so that New Orleans banks and buildings could stay dry. Residents in the flooded parishes felt completely betrayed, and many never received the payments they were promised. New Orleans literally sacrificed its neighbors to save itself and barely looked back afterward. 16. Hurricane Katrina's levee failures in 2005 were later ruled a straight-up engineering and design failure by federal investigators. The Army Corps of Engineers admitted their own flood protection system simply was not built to handle the storm. Walls that should have held back the water instead collapsed, sending floods pouring into entire neighborhoods. Thousands of families lost homes not purely to nature but to decades of flawed infrastructure planning. The admission forced a massive and expensive overhaul of the city's entire flood defense system afterward. New Orleans learned the hard way that man-made mistakes can be just as deadly as hurricanes. 17. Parts of New Orleans sit shockingly low, with some neighborhoods now resting more than 6 feet below sea level. The city essentially exists inside a bowl, surrounded by levees holding back the Mississippi River and nearby lake. Every heavy rainstorm becomes a serious logistical challenge requiring constant pumping just to keep streets from flooding. Engineers have spent well over a century building systems just to keep the city livable at all. Locals joke that New Orleans technically qualifies as a very ambitious science experiment in urban stubbornness. Somehow millions of people still choose to call this sinking bowl of a city home. 18. The Great Fire of 1788 destroyed roughly 80% of New Orleans buildings in a single devastating day. Flames spread rapidly through tightly packed wooden structures with almost nothing available to slow the destruction down. Residents watched helplessly as generations of French architecture disappeared in just a matter of hours. Spanish colonial authorities who governed the city stepped in and rebuilt using their own stricter building codes. Brick replaced wood and courtyards, replaced cramped alleys, completely transforming the city's entire appearance overnight. That single catastrophic fire accidentally created the iconic French Quarter look tourists admire and photograph today. 19. Louisiana remains the only American state whose legal system is based on the Napoleonic Code instead of English common law. This quirky legal foundation traces directly back to the state's French and Spanish colonial roots. Lawyers from other states often find Louisiana's court system confusing, since the rules simply work differently here. Property law contracts and inheritance all follow a distinctly different legal tradition than the rest of America. Law schools nationwide actually teach Louisiana as the weird exception whenever covering American legal systems. It turns out one entire state quietly operates by a completely different rulebook than everyone else. 20. Louisiana calls its counties parishes, a leftover term straight from its French Catholic colonial administrative structure. Early governance divided the territory based on Catholic church districts rather than typical American county lines. When the United States took over, they kept the term instead of switching to standard county naming. Visitors from other states are often confused hearing about parish government instead of familiar county government. Louisiana natives find this completely normal, while everyone else assumes it must be some kind of religious thing. 64 parishes later, Louisiana still proudly refuses to just call them counties like everybody else. 21. Governor Edwin Edwards won re-election back in 1983, even while facing serious federal racketeering charges against him. Voters seemingly shrugged off the accusations and returned him to office anyway without much hesitation. Edwards famously joked that the only way he could lose an election was getting caught with a dead girl or a live boy. Louisiana politics apparently operated on an entirely different scale of scandal tolerance than most other states. He would later actually serve prison time on unrelated corruption charges years after leaving office. Somehow, Louisiana voters treated political scandal less like a deal-breaker and more like just another Tuesday. 22. Huey Long once pushed the Louisiana legislature to pass more than 40 bills in a single wild week. Most lawmakers barely had time to read the bills before voting them straight into law. Long ruled the state almost like his personal kingdom, controlling nearly every lever of Louisiana government. Opponents accused him of turning the legislature into little more than a rubber stamp for his ambitions. Supporters loved him anyway, crediting him with road schools and hospitals built across the entire state. Love him or hate him, Huey Long ran Louisiana like nobody else in American political history ever has. 23. Louisiana did not require unanimous jury verdicts for felony convictions until a statewide vote finally changed that in 2018. Before that, a defendant could be convicted with just 10 out of 12 jurors agreeing. Critics pointed out the rule traced back to efforts aimed at diluting black jurors' influence on verdicts. The outdated law stayed on the books for well over a century before voters finally struck it down. Legal experts called it one of the most significant criminal justice reforms in the state's modern history. Louisiana quietly held on to this unusual rule for generations before finally catching up with the rest of America. 24. New Orleans saw the largest single lynching in American history back in 1891, when 11 Italian immigrants were killed. The mob acted after a jury acquitted several Italian men accused in a police chief's murder case. Angry residents stormed the jail, dragging prisoners out and killing them in broad daylight downtown. National newspapers actually praised the mob at the time, reflecting the era's ugly anti-immigrant sentiment. The incident even sparked a diplomatic crisis between the United States and Italy over the killings. It remains a dark and often overlooked chapter, tucked behind the city's usual festive reputation. 25. The mysterious Axeman of New Orleans terrorized the city with a string of brutal killings between 1918 and 1919. The unidentified killer reportedly targeted Italian grocers, breaking into homes and attacking families with an axe. Newspapers whipped the city into a frenzy, publishing an actual letter supposedly written by the killer himself. The letter claimed the Axeman would spare any home playing jazz music loudly on a certain night. Terrified residents packed dance halls and blasted jazz from every window across the entire city that night. The killer was never caught, and the case remains one of America's strangest unsolved mysteries today. 26. New Orleans police were placed under a federal consent decree back in 2012, following a scathing Justice Department investigation. Investigators uncovered patterns of excessive force, unconstitutional stops, and serious civil rights violations across the department. The findings painted a troubling picture of systemic problems within the city's entire police force. Federal oversight required sweeping reforms covering everything from training to use of force policies. The consent decree remained in place for well over a decade as the city worked toward compliance. It became one of the most significant police reform efforts anywhere in the entire country. 27. Huey Long, the powerful Louisiana governor and senator, was assassinated inside the state capitol building back in 1935. His killer reportedly acted after Long attempted to gerrymander a political rival right out of a job. Long's bodyguards immediately opened fire, killing the assassin within seconds of the shooting itself. He died 2 days later, still controlling Louisiana politics from his hospital bed until the very end. His death shocked the entire nation, given how much national influence Long had built for himself. Louisiana lost arguably its most powerful and controversial politician in the most dramatic way imaginable. 28. Louis Armstrong received his very first cornet as a gift from the Karnofsky family, who were Jewish immigrants. The family employed young Armstrong on their junk wagon and treated him with genuine kindness during a hard childhood. They fed him at their table and even helped him afford his first real musical instrument. Armstrong later credited the Karnofskys with shaping his work ethic and his lifelong appreciation for different cultures. He wore a Star of David pendant for the rest of his life, honoring their kindness. One of jazz's greatest legends built his entire career on a gift from an immigrant family's generosity. 29. Buddy Bolden is widely considered one of the founding fathers of jazz, despite never once commercially recording his music. His powerful cornet playing reportedly could be heard from blocks away across New Orleans neighborhoods. Bolden's mental health eventually declined, and he was committed to a state mental institution for the rest of his life. He spent nearly 25 years institutionalized while jazz exploded into a national phenomenon without him. No confirmed recordings of his playing have ever been found, despite decades of searching by historians. The man who arguably invented jazz never got to hear his own influence spread across America. 30. Jazz funerals in New Orleans famously combine mournful hymns on the way to the burial with upbeat music afterward. Brass bands play somber dirges while mourners solemnly march the casket slowly through the city streets. Once the burial itself is finished, the entire mood flips completely into a joyful celebration instead. Musicians launch into upbeat songs while mourners dance and parade back through the neighborhood together. The tradition blends grief and celebration in a way that feels uniquely and distinctly New Orleans. Locals call it a second line, and outsiders usually leave the experience completely amazed by what they witnessed. 31. New Orleans' brass band tradition traces directly back to instruments left over from Civil War military bands. Formerly enlisted musicians and freed people got access to surplus horns and drums after the war ended. Local musicians took these military instruments and reshaped them into something entirely new and distinctly African American. What started as marching band leftovers eventually evolved into the foundation of American jazz itself. Brass bands became fixtures at parades, funerals, and celebrations all across the city for generations afterward. A pile of leftover war instruments accidentally became the backbone of one of America's greatest musical exports. 32. The word gumbo actually comes from a West African word meaning okra, used as the dish's original thickener. Enslaved. West Africans brought both the ingredient and the cooking traditions that eventually became gumbo itself. Over generations, the dish absorbed French, Spanish, and Native American influences, creating something totally unique to Louisiana. Every family in New Orleans insists their own gumbo recipe is the only correct and authentic version. Arguments over roux color and ingredients can get shockingly heated at family gatherings across the entire city. A humble West African word for a vegetable somehow became the name of an entire culinary identity. 33. The po' boy sandwich got its iconic name from being handed out free to striking streetcar workers back in 1929. Two brothers who ran a local restaurant supported the strikers by feeding them enormous sandwiches completely free of charge. Whenever a striking worker walked in, staff would shout that another poor boy needed feeding immediately. The nickname stuck and eventually became the permanent name for the sandwich itself across the entire city. What started as an act of labor solidarity turned into one of Louisiana's most beloved food traditions. New Orleans basically named an entire sandwich after workers standing up for fair pay and better treatment. 34. Red beans and rice became a Monday tradition tied directly to using leftover ham bone from Sunday dinner. Monday was traditionally wash day, so households needed a meal that could simmer slowly without much attention. Beans cooked low and slow all day, while women handled the laundry using the leftover bone for flavor. The tradition stuck around for generations, becoming an unofficial weekly ritual across households throughout New Orleans. Restaurants still honor the custom today, often serving red beans and rice specifically every single Monday. A practical solution for busy laundry day somehow turned into one of the city's most cherished food traditions. 35. The muffaletta sandwich was created by Sicilian immigrants working at a French Quarter grocery store in the early 1900s. Italian laborers needed a filling lunch they could eat quickly during short breaks from hard manual work. The store owner combined cured meats, cheese, and olive salad into one enormous round sandwich instead. Workers loved it so much the sandwich eventually became a signature dish representing the entire city. Today, tourists line up specifically for muffalettas, treating them as an essential New Orleans food pilgrimage. An immigrant grocery store's practical lunch solution somehow became a beloved culinary icon known across the entire country. 36. Crawfish were not widely commercially farmed in Louisiana until sometime during the 1960s and 1970s decades. Before that, most crawfish were simply caught wild from swamps, rivers, and flooded rice fields nearby. Farmers eventually realized flooding rice fields after harvest created perfect conditions for raising crawfish as a second crop. This clever combination turned Louisiana into the undisputed crawfish capital of the entire United States. Crawfish boils soon became massive social gatherings, complete with newspaper-covered tables and spicy seasoning everywhere. A simple farming trick accidentally created one of the most iconic food traditions associated with the entire state. 37. New Orleans shotgun houses are built narrow and deep, with each room lining up in one straight row. Local legend claims you could theoretically fire a shotgun through the front door straight out the back. The design likely originated from African and Haitian architectural influences brought by enslaved and free black builders. These narrow homes allowed more houses to fit on small city lots throughout crowded New Orleans neighborhoods. The style eventually spread across the American South, becoming instantly recognizable wherever it appeared afterward. A humble architectural solution for tight city lots became one of New Orleans' most iconic housing styles. 38. Much of the French Quarter's famous ironwork balconies were actually built by Spanish colonial rulers rather than the French. After the devastating 1788 fire, Spanish authorities rebuilt the district using their own preferred architectural style completely. Elaborate iron balconies became a signature feature added largely during this Spanish rebuilding period afterward. Tourists today assume the ironwork reflects French heritage when it actually reflects Spanish colonial influence instead. Local guides love pointing out this common misconception to surprised visitors walking through the historic district. The most photographed feature of the French Quarter technically has almost nothing to do with the French at all. 39. New Orleans cemeteries earned the nickname Cities of the Dead, thanks to their dense rows of above-ground tombs. High water tables made traditional underground burial nearly impossible, without coffins eventually floating right back to the surface. Residents adapted by building elaborate stone vaults resembling small stone houses arranged along narrow cemetery pathways. Walking through these cemeteries genuinely feels like wandering through a miniature city built entirely for the dead. Tourists now take guided tours specifically to explore these hauntingly beautiful above-ground burial grounds. Even death in New Orleans somehow ended up with its own uniquely dramatic architectural personality. 40. Old New Orleans homes often feature blue painted porch ceilings, following a tradition rooted in Gula spiritual beliefs. The specific shade became known as Haint Blue, named after spirits called Haints in Gula folklore traditions. Residents believed the blue color tricked spirits into thinking the ceiling was open sky or water instead. Painting porch ceilings this way was meant to stop restless spirits from entering the home itself. The tradition spread throughout the South but remains especially common and cherished across New Orleans neighborhoods today. A practical spiritual defense system somehow became one of the most charming architectural details found throughout the entire city. 41. Mardi Gras throws. Originally consisted of nothing more than handfuls of flour and dirt thrown directly at crowds. Early parade riders apparently thought pelting spectators with cheap, messy debris counted as festive holiday fun. Unsurprisingly, angry crowds sometimes threw the flour right back, creating chaotic street brawls instead of celebration. City officials eventually banned the practice after one too many injuries, and general public outrage erupted downtown. Parade organizers gradually shifted toward beads, trinkets, and coins as safer alternatives for throwing at crowds. What began as literally throwing dirt at people somehow evolved into one of America's most beloved parade traditions. 42. The Mystic Crew of Comus, founded in 1857, stands as New Orleans' oldest official Mardi Gras parading organization. A secretive group of businessmen created Comus specifically to bring more organized structure to carnival celebrations. Members paraded anonymously behind masks, refusing to reveal their identities to the general public for generations. The crew introduced elaborate themed floats and torch-lit processions that completely transformed how Mardi Gras looked. Comus eventually stopped parading entirely during a dispute over integrating city celebrations decades later. One secretive social club accidentally created the entire modern blueprint for Mardi Gras as everyone knows it today. 43. King cake's hidden plastic baby tradition actually began as a hidden bean or dried pea back in the 1800s. Whoever found the item hidden inside their slice was crowned king or queen for that particular celebration. The lucky winner also traditionally had to buy or host the next king cake gathering themselves. Bakeries eventually swapped the bean for a small plastic baby figurine sometime in the 20th century. Finding the baby still means good luck, though biting down on it unexpectedly remains a genuine dental hazard. A simple hidden bean somehow evolved into a beloved tradition involving actual choking hazards baked into dessert. 44. Some elite Mardi Gras crews historically required membership to pass down strictly through family bloodlines for many generations. This exclusive system deliberately kept outsiders locked out regardless of wealth status or genuine community involvement. Certain crews maintained this closed-door policy well into the 20th century, sparking growing public criticism. City ordinances eventually forced some crews to open membership or lose their official parading permits entirely. Several old guard crews chose to stop parading altogether rather than open their exclusive membership rolls. Mardi Gras built its reputation on inclusive celebration while quietly running some genuinely exclusive private clubs behind it. 45. New Orleans Zulu Social Aid and Pleasure Club began in 1909 as satire poking fun at white Mardi Gras crews. Black New Orleanians created Zulu specifically to mock the pompous exclusive traditions of established white parading organizations. Members wore grass skirts and blackface makeup as deliberate satire aimed squarely at white society's own traditions. What started as pointed satire eventually grew into one of the most beloved crews in the entire city. Zulu's coconut throws remain among the most highly prized and sought-after souvenirs during Mardi Gras today. A satirical protest against exclusion somehow became one of Mardi Gras' most cherished and celebrated traditions. 46. Marie Laveau. New Orleans' famous 19th century voodoo queen also worked a completely ordinary day job as a licensed hairdresser. She reportedly used her hairdressing clients as valuable sources of gossip and information throughout the entire city. This insider knowledge apparently helped fuel her reputation for mysteriously knowing things she really should not have known. Laveau blended spiritual practice with shrewd business sense, building genuine influence across New Orleans society. Wealthy families and everyday residents alike reportedly sought her guidance for everything from health to romance. New Orleans' most legendary spiritual figure spent her days doing hair between mysterious spiritual consultations. 47. Louisiana voodoo blends West African spiritual practices together with Catholic saint veneration brought by French colonizers. Enslaved Africans adapted their traditional religious practices by mapping their own spirits onto familiar Catholic saints instead. This clever blending allowed spiritual traditions to survive discreetly under the watchful eye of colonial authorities. Practitioners today still honor both African spirits and Catholic saints within the very same spiritual practice. The result created a uniquely Louisiana religious tradition found nowhere else quite like it in America. Two completely different spiritual worlds somehow merged into one distinctly New Orleans religious tradition, still practiced today. 48. Marie Laveau's tomb is famously marked with X symbols left by visitors following an unofficial wishing ritual. Legend claims marking 3 X's on her tomb while making a wish will bring good fortune. Cemetery officials have repeatedly tried stopping the practice since the marks actually damage the historic tomb itself. Visitors keep doing it anyway, despite fines, warnings, and even fencing installed around the grave. The cemetery eventually restricted public access specifically because of the sheer volume of tomb graffiti. Even in death, New Orleans voodoo queen still cannot catch a break from overly enthusiastic tourists. 49. New Orleans port handled more cotton exports than any other American city before the Civil War even began. Cotton grown across the South flowed down the Mississippi River straight into New Orleans warehouses and docks. The city's economy boomed almost entirely on the back of this massive cotton export business. Wealthy cotton merchants built grand mansions throughout the city, funded directly by this lucrative export trade. New Orleans became one of the richest cities in America almost entirely because of cotton and enslaved labor. The city's antebellum glamour was built quite literally on bales of cotton and immense human suffering. 50. New Orleans ranked as the 5th largest city in the entire United States by population back in 1840. Its bustling port and thriving trade economy attracted immigrants and merchants from around the entire world. The city rivaled major northern cities in size, wealth, and overall commercial importance during this era. Multiple languages filled the streets, reflecting the city's incredibly diverse immigrant and multicultural population at the time. New Orleans' massive size and wealth eventually declined relative to other rapidly growing American cities later on. It is strange to imagine a city now known mostly for tourism, once ranking among America's largest. 51. New Orleans Port today still ranks among the largest in the entire United States by total cargo tonnage handled. Massive ships carrying grain, steel, and countless other goods pass through the port constantly every single day. The Mississippi River gives New Orleans direct access to the entire American heartland through one connected waterway. This strategic location has kept the port economically vital for the city for well over 2 centuries now. Modern shipping containers replaced old cotton bales, but the port's core importance never really changed at all. New Orleans quietly remains one of America's most important trade hubs, despite its wild party city reputation. 52. The St. Charles Avenue streetcar line opened in 1835 and remains the oldest continuously operating streetcar line in the entire world. It has survived wars, hurricanes, economic depressions, and countless changes in transportation technology across nearly 2 centuries. Riders today travel the exact same route through the exact same beautiful oak-lined neighborhoods as generations before them. The green streetcars have become such an iconic symbol that they appear constantly in movies and postcards. Locals still use it as genuine daily transportation, rather than treating it purely as a tourist attraction. New Orleans somehow kept a 19th century transportation system, running longer than almost anything else in America. 53. New Orleans streetcars still run today on the exact same 19th century rail gauge installed generations ago. Modern engineers have had to work around this historic measurement rather than simply modernizing it entirely. Replacement parts sometimes require custom fabrication since standard modern rail equipment simply does not fit properly. City officials have repeatedly chosen historic preservation over convenient modernization for these beloved streetcar lines. Maintaining century-old infrastructure requires surprisingly specialized knowledge that few transit systems anywhere else still need. New Orleans essentially runs a functioning transportation museum piece as actual daily public transit for its residents. 54. The New Orleans Saints did not manage a single winning season during their entire first 20 years in the NFL. Fans became so famously frustrated that some started wearing paper bags over their heads at games. The team earned the unfortunate nickname the Aints, reflecting just how bad those early seasons truly were. Despite the constant losing, loyal fans kept showing up, filling the Superdome year after disappointing year. The Saints eventually turned things around, winning a Super Bowl championship decades later after Hurricane Katrina. Few fan bases in American sports history endured quite that much heartbreak before finally getting their reward. 55. Boxing legend Jack Dempsey once fought an exhibition match in New Orleans during Prohibition-era Storyville's declining years. The fight drew massive crowds, eager to see the heavyweight champion perform live in person. New Orleans' entertainment scene remained wildly popular, even as federal authorities cracked down on the city's red light district. Boxing exhibitions became one of many ways the city kept entertaining visitors, despite changing laws and regulations. Dempsey's appearance added another colorful chapter to New Orleans' long history of hosting major entertainment spectacles. The city that never quite followed the rules found yet another way to keep the party going strong. 56. The Superdome served as an emergency shelter for tens of thousands of people during Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Conditions inside quickly deteriorated as the massive stadium roof suffered serious storm damage during the hurricane itself. Food, water, and basic supplies ran dangerously low as evacuees waited desperately for rescue and assistance. The images from inside the Superdome became some of the most haunting symbols of the entire disaster. Despite the horrific conditions, the stadium likely saved countless lives simply by providing emergency shelter at all. What was built purely for football games ended up becoming an unexpected symbol of survival during America's worst disaster. 57. Storyville operated as an officially legal red light district in New Orleans from 1897 until 1917 when it finally closed. City officials created it specifically to confine prostitution to one contained and regulated neighborhood district. The area became famous for jazz music brothels and a wild nightlife scene unlike anywhere else in America. Storyville actually helped launch the careers of several early jazz musicians who performed regularly throughout the district. The United States Navy eventually forced the district's closure, worried about sailors near a nearby military base. New Orleans once had an entire neighborhood dedicated to vice that the government itself officially sanctioned. 58. New Orleans largely ignored prohibition enforcement, with speakeasies operating remarkably openly throughout the entire 1920s decade. Local law enforcement reportedly turned a blind eye while illegal alcohol flowed freely throughout the city's bars. Visitors from stricter states traveled specifically to New Orleans knowing they could drink without much real consequence. The city's already loose reputation for nightlife and entertainment made ignoring prohibition feel almost completely natural. Federal agents struggled constantly to enforce a law that practically nobody in the city took seriously at all. New Orleans treated national prohibition laws more like a polite suggestion than any kind of actual rule. 59. New Orleans developed its own distinct local accent called yacht, shaped primarily by Irish Italian and German immigrants. Surprisingly, French influence played a smaller role in shaping this unique accent than most outsiders would assume. The name yacht comes from the common local greeting, "Where are you?" at shortened down over time. Linguists have compared the accent's sound to certain New York City neighborhoods rather than typical Southern speech patterns. Locals proudly use yacht slang as a way of instantly identifying genuine native New Orleanians from tourists. A city famous for French heritage somehow developed an accent that barely sounds French at all. 60. Many New Orleans street names are French in spelling but pronounced in ways that do not match standard French at all. Locals pronounce Burgundy Street and Chartres Street completely differently than any actual French speaker ever would. Tourists attempting proper French pronunciation often get gently corrected or quietly laughed at by amused locals nearby. These pronunciation quirks developed over generations as English speakers gradually reshaped the original French street names. Getting the pronunciation wrong has practically become its own unofficial rite of passage for first-time visitors. New Orleans kept the French spelling, but confidently threw the actual French pronunciation rules straight out the window. 61. New Orleans hosted the World's Fair back in 1884, which ended up nearly bankrupting the entire city afterward. Organizers hoped the fair would showcase Southern progress and attract international investment and tourism to the region. Attendance numbers fell drastically short of expectations, leaving the fair drowning in massive unpaid debts. Many buildings constructed specifically for the event were abandoned or demolished shortly after the fair closed. City officials spent years afterward untangling the financial mess left behind by the failed International Exposition. New Orleans learned the hard way that hosting a World's Fair does not guarantee the world actually shows up. 62. New Orleans' famous carnival celebrations were completely suspended throughout the entirety of the Civil War years. Union occupation and wartime hardship made festive parades and elaborate parties feel wildly inappropriate for the times. Resources that once funded lavish costumes and floats were instead diverted toward wartime survival and basic necessities. Mardi Gras eventually returned once the war ended, with residents desperate for celebration after years of hardship. The post-war carnival celebrations came back bigger and more elaborate than ever, as if making up for lost time. Even America's most stubborn party city could not throw Mardi Gras in the middle of a war. 63. New Orleans issued its own Confederate paper currency during the Civil War due to severe local cash shortages. Banks and city officials printed local notes when standard currency became increasingly scarce and unreliable throughout the war. These makeshift bills were often crude in design, reflecting the desperate, improvised nature of wartime economics. Merchants accepted the local currency simply because there was often no practical alternative available for daily transactions. Collectors today actually seek out these old Confederate-era New Orleans notes as unique historical curiosities. A city famous for its wealth briefly had to invent its own money just to keep functioning. 64. Ruby Bridges integrated a New Orleans elementary school in 1960, while escorted daily by armed federal marshals for protection. She was just 6 years old, walking past screaming angry crowds, simply to attend her first-grade classroom. Many white parents pulled their own children out of the school rather than let them attend alongside her. For an entire year, Ruby sat mostly alone in her classroom with only one teacher willing to teach her. Norman Rockwell later immortalized her walk to school in a famous painting seen by millions of Americans. One small child's brave walk to school became one of the defining images of the entire civil rights movement. 65. New Orleans public schools remained segregated for a full 6 years after the 1954 Brown versus Board ruling. City and state officials fought integration aggressively using legal loopholes, delays, and outright open defiance for years. Federal courts eventually forced the city's hand, requiring integration to finally begin during the 1960 school year. Even then, only a handful of black students initially integrated into previously all-white schools citywide. Violent protests and mass boycotts erupted as many white families resisted the changes happening around them. New Orleans dragged its feet on school integration longer than most people probably assume today. 66. Author Lafcadio Hearn helped popularize Creole cuisine nationally through his published New Orleans cookbook released back in 1885. Hearn was a journalist fascinated by New Orleans culture who documented local recipes, traditions, and folklore extensively. His cookbook introduced readers across America to dishes like gumbo and jambalaya many had never even heard of. Hearn's writing helped shape how the rest of the country perceived New Orleans as an exotic culinary destination. He eventually left Louisiana entirely and became even more famous for his later writings about Japan instead. A wandering journalist accidentally became one of the earliest promoters of New Orleans' now famous food culture. 67. Homer Plessy deliberately staged his own arrest on a New Orleans train, specifically to challenge segregation laws head-on. Plessy, who was mostly white by ancestry, sat in a whites-only train car and refused to move. He had actually coordinated with local activists in advance, planning the arrest as a legal test case. The resulting Supreme Court case, Plessy versus Ferguson, upheld segregation, establishing the doctrine of separate but equal nationally. That devastating ruling legalized segregation across America for decades until finally being overturned much later. One carefully planned train ride in New Orleans ended up shaping American civil rights law for generations afterward. 68. New Orleans built Higgins boats that Dwight Eisenhower later credited as absolutely essential to the D-Day invasion's success. Andrew Higgins designed the shallow draft landing craft specifically suited for storming heavily defended beaches directly. Thousands of these boats were manufactured right in New Orleans shipyards throughout the entire war effort. Eisenhower reportedly said Higgins personally won the war for the Allies through this critical boat design alone. The boats allowed troops to land directly on beaches rather than relying on established ports and docks. A New Orleans shipbuilder's clever invention ended up playing a decisive role in liberating Europe from Nazi occupation. 69. The Higgins shipyards in New Orleans employed a fully racially integrated workforce decades before federal integration laws ever required it. Andrew Higgins insisted on equal pay for black and white workers performing the exact same jobs throughout his shipyards. This was remarkably progressive for the Deep South during the 1940s, when segregation remained the strict legal norm everywhere. Higgins reportedly said he did not care about a worker's race, only about how well they built boats. His shipyards became one of the largest employers in New Orleans during the entire war effort. A wartime shipbuilder quietly broke segregation norms decades before the law ever forced anyone else to do the same. 70. New Orleans lost nearly 30% of its total population in the decade immediately following Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out, forcing residents to relocate permanently to cities across the country instead. Some neighborhoods have never fully recovered their pre-storm population, even many years after the disaster. Displaced residents built entirely new lives in cities like Houston and Atlanta, rather than eventually returning home. The demographic shakeup permanently changed the city's racial and economic makeup in ways still felt today. Hurricane Katrina did not just flood a city, It permanently reshaped who actually calls New Orleans home. 71. New Orleans' below-sea-level pumping system, first built back in 1899, still removes billions of gallons of water annually today. Engineer Albert Baldwin Wood later designed massive pumps that became a model, studied by cities worldwide facing similar flooding challenges. Without constant pumping, much of the city would simply flood within days, given its location below sea level. The system operates around the clock, especially during heavy rainstorms and hurricane season throughout the year. Locals largely take this constant, invisible effort for granted, despite it being essential to the city's very existence. New Orleans quite literally only exists today because of machines working non-stop just to keep it dry. New Orleans has spent 3 centuries flooding itself, selling itself, and partying through disasters that would end any other city. So, which one of these 71 facts genuinely shocked you the most? Drop it in the comments right now because we read every single one. And if your brain enjoys weird American history served up dumb, funny, and true, hit subscribe to Dumbest Things so you never miss the next deep dive. We've got way more ridiculous history waiting for you. See you in the next one.